In this video, I'll explore the Photoshop timeline for creating an animated slideshow that we can export out as video. While Photoshop is certainly a great tool for editing still photographs and creating graphics, it's also remarkably capable of editing video and creating animated content. So let's explore that by creating an animated slideshow. I'll start by clicking on making a new file and use the category of film and video to see some of the document preset sizes for video. I'm going to choose the HD size 1280 by 720, the size of a lot of standard televisions, and I'll go ahead and take a look at that. The next thing that I want to do is make sure that I have my timeline panel available, and I've got it here, but if you don't, you can find that under the window timeline option and bring that up. And what we're going to do is create a video timeline here. You'll notice with the drop menu I could also create frame by frame animations, but I actually want a video timeline, so I'll click on that create video timeline option and we'll get our timeline. I need to import my media into this timeline. I don't really have any images yet, so I'll click on the import media button. So right here where the little film strip is, there's a drop arrow where we could add our media. And to this, I can add in different media. I can hold down Control to select different options. I could add both video and still image content to this. I'm going to go ahead and just have a series of still images, which I'll bring in. This will create what's known as a video group, and it puts all of the puts everything into a layer, and that layer is in sequence within our video timeline. It's hard to see those right now. I can expand that out with my view, clicking on the bigger mountains here or sliding this back and forth in terms of the time scale. And I can see that every single image has been added for 5 seconds to the timeline. That's the default here. I don't really need that background layer anymore. I could just get rid of that by deleting it. And if I wanted to reorder my images, because I actually wanted Diver Nick here to be first, one thing I could do is simply drag and drop them. And in the video group, the sequence here of their layers is also represents their sequence on the timeline. So I could also just drag and drop the layer down to the very first one, and it would be the first one in the sequence. So I'll start there with Diver Nick. I already have a slideshow. If I simply hit spacebar to do the playback, or you can hit the play button here, you'll see that every 5 seconds we'll have a jump cut to our next slide in the slideshow. So it's pretty easy to get a quick slideshow up and running, but this can be made better through some transitions and animation stuff. So let's do that. If you wanted to change the durations of your slides, you might want to do that as well. So this first slide, I actually might want to go for a longer period of time. Maybe that one is 6 seconds while the other ones are 5. So I could drag that out. You'll see that my timeline adjusts accordingly. That one's a little bit longer, but you could also make some of these other images shorter if you wanted to not go as long. Okay, so I've got that, and one of the things I can do is add some transitions to these. So for this very first one, I actually might fade that up from black. So I'm going to go ahead and say fade with black and drag that on to the beginning here. And that's going to be a 1 second duration. And you'll see that if I grab my playback head, we're going to start on black, and in 1 second it's going to fade up to see that very first photo. Sometimes you might want to fade the very last photo out. So what I could do is go to this last one and also do a fade with black option, and you can choose a different color if you wanted to, but in this case I'm going to do that on the very end and pull that to the end, and so at the end of the timeline our last image will fade out to black as well, and we'll be done. Alright, now I might want some transitions between these images, and right now they're just kind of jump cuts. So to add some transitions, I can choose the crossfade option. You can see just drag to apply, and I can have a little crossfade in between. The duration of that crossfade is 1 second. If you wanted it to be quicker or slower, you can change that number. But 1 second seems good for me for these particular ones. I'm just going to leave that there and add this crossfade transition to each of my slideshow images so that I go from one to the next. So open it up, drag it, drop it in between the different images, and I'm going to have a crossfade from one image to the next. Let's go ahead and do that. If we play back our slideshow now, you'll see that every 5 seconds we'll get a 1 second crossfading transition between one image and the next, and we didn't even have to stack them on top of each other and work with opacity or anything like that. It just does it automatically for us. So there we go, we're getting an animated slideshow. This can get even better though. Our slides don't have to just be static slides. We can make them animated. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my timeline, go back to this first image that's there. If I right click on that image, you'll see that there's some options for motion on it. So I'm going to select that very first one, right click, to potentially add some different motion, and I'd like this to be a zoom in kind of function. So I'm going to choose the zoom option from the center in terms of the root point, and I'm going to have it zoom in, and it will resize to fit the canvas, and it will just automatically add that motion to this particular image. You'll see that there's a transformation happening. I could have done this manually on the image as well, but this automatically adds that effect of zooming in so that that first diver is kind of moving towards us, and then we transition to the next image. You can see that there's other motion options. I might want to do both panning and zooming, for example, or just panning around. I could do that. I'll choose pan. I could choose a pan direction, or what direction I want this to go based on the rotation. And then that's going to give this image an opportunity to sort of pan in that direction. Some interesting things with this particular image, I might want to pan and zoom. So I could choose pan and zoom, for example. We'll have it zoom in, or I think maybe I'll have this one zoom out while panning in a particular direction. So I'm going to go that way. And so you'll see that it's going to sort of zoom out while sort of panning as well. So we'll get some movement on these images. I'll do the same for this next one. We could choose to have a pan and zoom. And then in this particular case, I might take that image, zoom in on it, and I'm going to have it go from this direction, actually about this direction, I think, and so that it's going to move towards the back, away from me, as I'm zooming in on it. There we go. Maybe this image I'll try the rotation option. So we could rotate and zoom. You can see how much you want to rotate, but this is going to just kind of, rotate that particular image. And then for this last one, I'm just going to go ahead and zoom in on it. But let's say I didn't want to go from the very center. I wanted to anchor it somewhere else. I'm going to go ahead and anchor this on the left-hand side and then zoom in. And you'll see that that's going to zoom in from the left side, not necessarily from both sides, but just from the left side before fading out. All right, so now we've got an animated slideshow with transitions and pans and all kinds of fun stuff for taking a look at our animated slideshow video here. We'll be able to export this out to video. Okay, so within this video group, I like that, that's fine, except that I would maybe like to add some titles to this at the beginning, and I could animate those titles as well. Let's explore that just to make it a little nicer. So to add my titles, I'm going to go ahead and create a text option here, and I'll have some text. I'm going to say, I want this text, I'll just say, let's go scuba on this very first one. And I could certainly choose fonts and everything. I'm just going to leave the defaults for right now. I want that text to be out of my video group, and you see that it added it to the end of the timeline. I'm going to go ahead and move that so that it's on top of the other content, so that when I see Diver Nick here, I also have the words let's go scuba. I'd like that to center, and I'm going to actually align this on the screen at the very, very center. So I'm going to say center, center for right now. Take a look at it in relation to Nick. I think what I'll do is move it up just a little bit so it's sort of like his finger is right there, pointing right in between the words go and scuba. And then I'm going to duplicate that and make another one that actually says diving. So let's go ahead and bring this up. And for some reason I duplicated the porcupine fish. I didn't mean to do that. I'll delete that particular layer, didn't want that, but I do want this other one, and I'm going to have that say diving. I want that quite a bit larger, so I'm going to hit Control T just to get my transformation, and I'm going to scale that up quite a bit so that it's a bigger version. Then we'll move it down under the word scuba, and I think I'd like to have some drop shadows on these things, maybe some different styles to them. So I could do that. I'm going to go ahead and create a drop shadow with my layer effects. We could take a look at that drop shadow. Actually, the drop shadow is animatable, so I'll show you how you could do that in your timeline as well. So I might actually have a drop shadow on Let's Go Scuba as well. I'll duplicate that holding down the Alt or Option key and just drag one effect to a different layer so that they both have the same drop shadow. Maybe on this diving layer, I might actually like to see that with some content like seeing through it. There we go. We can actually see through it, although it disappears a little bit. So I might actually go to the effects and also add a stroke to this. I'm going to choose to add a white stroke. 4 pixels seems about right. So I'm going to go ahead and click on there, and maybe that's our little titles that will be there. So I can say, let's go scuba diving. Let's do a couple other things fun with this. So one of the things that you can animate within Photoshop is actually the warping of your text. So I'm going to go ahead and warp the diving text. And what we'll do is I'll use this flag warping and sort of maybe make it look like it's going up and down in the water. So what I'm going to do is start it here at maybe -10. And I'll zoom in on this particular one. So this is about the 5 seconds there for this. And what we'll do is, and I might want this to be just a little longer time span. So if I wanted to change the time spans, I could just roll over these, drag them out. And I actually want Nick maybe to be 6 seconds and these timings to be a little bit longer here. So I'm going to drag those out. All right. And then what we'll do is I will take the word diving here, open up the transformations options, and you can see that I could animate the transformation, the opacity, the style, and even the text warping of these things. I'll put keyframes there to animate those things. And so what I'm going to do is maybe have this shift. So about a second in on text warp, I'll go ahead and add another keyframe at that moment by clicking on the Add Keyframe button, and I'll change the warp there of that type. So I'll go to the warp text where we see that it's at -10. I'm going to switch that to 10, and you'll see that it actually, once I click OK, it's going to animate that transition of the warp text. So I think that's kind of fun. What I might do is go another second in, do another keyframe, go back the other way. So I'll go ahead and say type warp text, go back the other way. Maybe I go a little further this time, -15. And then that would change the speed of it too. Actually, it would get a little faster if it was going to -15. Then I'll go another second in, put in a keyframe, and I'll go warp the text again. So I'll say type warp text 15. Pretty fun. And then maybe in another second, I'm just going to have it settle back down to normal. So I'll go ahead, put a keyframe there as well. We'll say type warp text, and I'll just basically take off the warping of that. And so we're animating that warped text. So let's go scuba diving, kind of fun. Then animating that out. And what I might do is also add in a transition here where I'll fade this out to black at the end. And so what we could do is just fade that to black. And that, you'll see what it's doing. It's really not affecting the strokes or the drop shadows, but it would be affecting the sort of color of the inside of that as I did that. Kind of interesting. I don't know that that's exactly what I want either. If I actually don't want that, I just want it to fade out, then instead of that, I'll just delete that effect and choose opacity. And in the opacity here, I'm going to have my opacity start at 5 seconds with it fully opaque, but then at the very end of the timeline, I'll add in another opacity and then take my slider to 0, and that will go away in that case. So what I might want to do is do the same thing for the Let's Go Scuba. That's just hanging out, except I do want the opacity at 5 seconds to be full opacity, and then go to the very end here of that timeline and hit the keyframe again and take the opacity of that down. And we can animate that so that the text is going to go away at the very end. So it will say, let's go scuba diving, and then that text will go away. Pretty fun. We could actually animate other elements of this. So it would be possible, for example, to animate the drop shadow of this. So let's say right when this settles down, right there, I'm going to make the drop shadow extend. And so that's style in terms of animation. So I'm going to put a keyframe right there. Then I'm going to put a keyframe at, before it fades out, right there at a second in, add a keyframe for style. And I'm going to open up my drop shadow style and extend the distance of it. So let's say that drop shadow goes down to like 50, which would make it a lot further. Well, that's going to animate that drop shadow. So there's some fun little animation things that we could do as a part of this. And so hopefully you can kind of see what some of the possibilities might be within this. Okay, so I've got an animated slideshow with some titles. The only thing I'm really missing is some sound here. So I'm going to add an audio track. And I could do that right there where we could add audio. I could choose out what audio to add. And I've actually downloaded some audio from YouTube. And I'll add that right here. And the audio that I've added is going to be way longer than my timeline. So what I'm going to do is just zoom way out and grab that audio, just drag it in because I really want it the same length as my current timeline. And then I can hear that if I simply hit the spacebar to play it out. I could play that particular audio, hear what it sounds like. And we've got some options for it as well. Like if you wanted that audio to fade in, you could do that. I could say that the audio fades in over about 2 seconds so it doesn't start at full volume. If the audio is a little loud for the track, maybe I want to bring that down. Maybe it's just 80% volume, for example, and that would work. And then at some other sort of space in here, maybe at the very end of this, I might want it to fade back out. So I could do that as well. Click on there and have a fade out that takes, where the audio at the end just fades out over 2 seconds and goes to silence. And so then, this is going to fade that audio in to full volume. And then at the very end here, it should fade the audio back out. While I get my fade out, I get the audio fade out as well. Pretty sweet. I've got myself a slideshow. The last thing I really want to do is export this out for video, so I should save my file. I'll go ahead and do a save as and save it. And I'll go ahead and put it into this video and animation file, and I'll call this slideshow. And then last but not least, exporting it out for video. I'm going to go ahead and say render that as video. We'll get our render video dialog box show up. It's going to be called Slideshow MP4. I can select the folder that I want to put that in as well. I'm going to have it in this video and animation folder, select that folder, and I'll check to make sure what my format is. MP4 encoded with H.264 at 1280 by 720. That's perfect, exactly what I want. Let's render that out, and it will take a second to render the video. You can see the sort of render timeline happening. As soon as it's done rendering, we should get our video file for preview, and we can take a look at what that looks like. I'll do that next. All right, it's done, so I can look for that video file in my file system. And I can see that it's right there. There's that slideshow file. I could double click and open that. It will open in your video software. We can take a look at that. All right, there's my Let's Go Scuba Diving video. It's all ready for posting to YouTube or social media or wherever I want to sort of put that. And hopefully you've enjoyed exploring the video timeline inside of Photoshop.